The world's safest bank was actually a crashing airline. And the craziest part? It all happened because they tried to buy the worst airlines in Europe. For over 50 years, the Swiss national carrier was not just a company. It was a symbol of absolute perfection. In Switzerland, people did not call it Swissair, they called it the Flying Bank. The nickname was not an exaggeration. The airline was so ridiculously cash-rich, so stable, and so meticulously managed that it possessed a AAA credit rating. Its balance sheet was stronger than most sovereign nations. Its flight attendants wore pristine gold-trimmed uniforms, its pilots were treated like diplomats, and its first-class passengers dined on fresh caviar served on real porcelain plates high above the clouds. To fly Swissair was to experience the peak of Swiss efficiency, luxury, and reliability. It was a national treasure, an extension of the country's legendary banking sector. But behind this glittering facade of luxury and stability lay a ticking time bomb of corporate hubris that would culminate in the most embarrassing national disaster in Swiss history. The trouble began silently in 1992. The geopolitical landscape of Europe was transforming rapidly. The European Union was forming a single aviation market, allowing airlines to fly freely across borders, pick up passengers in any city, and set prices without government interference. This deregulation was a massive threat to any airline left outside the circle. In a historic referendum, Swiss voters narrowly chose not to join the European Economic Area. This single vote instantly isolated Switzerland and locked Swissair out of the booming European single market. Suddenly, the pristine Swiss carrier was a giant trapped in a tiny, landlocked mountain country. It could not buy up routes inside Europe, and European giants like British Airways and Lufthansa were expanding rapidly, threatening to squeeze Swissair into irrelevance. Desperate to survive, the executives at Swissair knew they had to act. They could not join the major global airline alliances like Star Alliance because of their regulatory isolation. So, they decided to build their own empire. They hired the world's most elite, expensive management consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, to help them draft a survival plan. The result of this high-priced collaboration was a highly aggressive, deeply controversial plan known as the Hunter strategy. The premise was deceptively simple. If Swissair could not join the existing European giants, it would hunt for its own partners. It would buy up minority stakes in other European airlines, link them together in a new alliance dominated by Swissair, and bypass the European Union's regulatory blockades. It sounded brilliant on paper. In the quiet, wood-paneled boardrooms of Zurich, the strategy was hailed as a stroke of genius. But the execution of the Hunter strategy was a descent into financial madness. Instead of buying stakes in healthy, growing airlines, Swissair began purchasing major shares in struggling, deeply indebted national carriers that nobody else wanted. They targeted airlines that were bleeding cash, hoping that Swiss management and Swiss capital could magically turn them around. Their first major target was Sabena, the national carrier of Belgium. Sabena was famous in the aviation industry for a truly spectacular record. It had not made a profit in almost 40 consecutive years. It was a black hole of state-subsidized inefficiency. Yet, Swissair bought a 49% stake in Sabena, pouring hundreds of millions of francs into the bleeding company. But they did not stop there. The Hunter strategy was hungry. Swissair went on a wild shopping spree across Europe, buying stakes in LTU and Aerolloyd in Germany, Volare and Air Europe in Italy, TAP Air Portugal, LOT Polish Airlines, and even a collection of tiny, unprofitable French regional carriers like Air Littoral and AOM. And that is exactly when the trap snapped shut. Instead of creating a powerful new aviation empire, Swissair had essentially tied itself to a dozen drowning men. Every single one of these acquired airlines was in far worse financial shape than Swissair's executives realized. The contracts signed by Swissair were disastrously structured. Due to regulatory limits on foreign ownership, Swissair could not take full operational control of these companies, meaning they could not fire inefficient workers or restructure the routes. Yet, the contracts legally obligated Swissair to fund these failing airlines' massive operating losses and capital requirements. Swissair had become the ultimate guarantor for billions of dollars of foreign debt. The pristine cash reserves of the flying bank began to vaporize at a terrifying speed. The cash was flowing out of Zurich to prop up failing operations in Brussels, Lisbon, and Rome. Inside the Swissair boardroom, a culture of deep denial and corporate groupthink took over. The board of directors was not made up of seasoned aviation experts. Instead, it was filled with the elite of Swiss society, politicians, industrial aristocrats, and high-ranking bank executives. They were individuals used to deference and success. They trusted the McKinsey charts, they trusted their highly polished CEO, Philippe Bruggesser, and they refused to believe that the legendary Swissair could ever fail. Whenever a brave executive raised concerns about the soaring debts, they were quietly sidelined or ignored. The company began using complex creative accounting methods to mask the true extent of the losses, hiding the massive liabilities of their foreign subsidiaries off the main balance sheet. To the public, Swissair still looked like the unstoppable king of the skies. By the end of the year 2000, the reality could no longer be hidden behind clever accounting. Swissair was losing over 3 million Swiss francs every single day. The company's debt had ballooned to an astronomical 15 billion francs. The credit rating agencies, which had once awarded Swissair a pristine AAA, began aggressively downgrading the company's debt to junk status. Panic started to spread through the Swiss financial elite. In January 2001, as the scale of the disaster became undeniable, the board finally fired the architect of the strategy, CEO Philippe Bruggesser. They brought in a restructuring expert, Mario Corti, to try and save the company. But Corti was handed the keys to a house that was already fully engulfed in flames. Corti immediately tried to sell off the disastrous foreign acquisitions, but nobody wanted to buy bleeding airlines in a weakening global economy. Sabena was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Swissair was contractually bound to pay them hundreds of millions of dollars they simply did not have. Swissair's own banks, including UBS and Credit Suisse, began to quietly pull back, restricting the airline's credit lines and demanding more collateral. The flying bank was running out of oxygen. Then came the morning of September 11, 2001. The terror attacks in New York and Washington shook the global aviation industry to its absolute core. Within hours, global air travel plummeted. Insurance companies canceled airline liability policies overnight. For a healthy airline, September 11th was a severe crisis. For Swissair, it was the final, lethal blow. The company's remaining cash reserves evaporated in a matter of days as ticket sales collapsed to near zero. The climax of this corporate tragedy arrived on October 2, 2001. It is a date burned into the collective memory of the Swiss nation as the grounding. In the early hours of the morning, Swissair's CEO desperately pleaded with the major Swiss banks, UBS and Credit Suisse, to release a promised emergency credit line of 250 million francs just to pay for daily fuel and airport landing fees. But the banks, engaged in a cold-hearted corporate power struggle, delayed the payout. They wanted to strip Swissair of its valuable assets and let the debt-ridden parent company die. At Zurich Airport, the consequences of this financial warfare became brutally, visibly real. At 12:15 p.m., Flight SR-330, a massive wide-body jet bound for Chicago, was taxiing toward the runway. Suddenly, the pilot received an urgent radio transmission from the control tower. The fuel suppliers at the airport had refused to fill the plane's tanks. They knew Swissair was broke, and they demanded immediate cash payment before they would pump a single drop of fuel. Swissair did not have the cash. Within minutes, similar scenes played out at airports all over the world. In London, Paris, and New York, local airport authorities refused to let Swissair planes take off because the airline could not pay its landing fees. Fuel companies demanded corporate credit cards, which were promptly declined. At exactly 3:30 p.m., Swissair's management made an announcement that shocked the entire world: all flight operations were suspended indefinitely. The entire fleet of one of the world's most prestigious airlines was grounded. Over 250 flights were cancelled instantly. More than 39,000 passengers were left stranded at airports across the globe, staring in absolute disbelief at the departure boards where the word cancelled was plastered next to every single Swissair flight. The pride of Switzerland, the ultimate symbol of national prestige and efficiency, lay broken on the tarmac, unable to even buy enough fuel to fly home. It was a humiliating public spectacle. Swiss citizens watched in horror as their national icon was treated like a common bankrupt debtor, with planes physically chained to gates in foreign airports. The political fallout was immediate and explosive. Angry crowds gathered outside the headquarters of UBS in Zurich, throwing eggs and accusing the bank of betraying the nation. The Swiss government was forced to step in with an emergency multi-billion-franc bailout just to get the stranded passengers home and keep a fraction of the planes flying temporarily. But the damage was done. The legendary Swissair was dead. Its assets were systematically carved up, and its profitable regional subsidiary, Crossair, was used to construct a tiny new national carrier called Swiss International Airlines, which was eventually sold off to its bitter historical rival, the German giant Lufthansa. The collapse of Swissair cost shareholders, taxpayers, and creditors over $17 billion. It shattered the myth of Swiss corporate invincibility and led to the largest criminal corporate trial in Swiss history, where top executives and board members faced charges of mismanagement, falsifying documents, and creditor preference. Though they were ultimately acquitted due to the high legal threshold for criminal intent, their reputations were destroyed forever. The story of Swissair remains the ultimate cautionary tale of corporate hubris, proving that no brand is too big to fail, no reputation is too pristine to be ruined, and even the most stable flying bank can be flown directly into the ground by a single, catastrophic strategy. If you thought this corporate destruction was insane, wait until you find out what happened when South Korea's second-largest conglomerate collapsed under $80 billion of debt in our video on the shocking downfall of Daewoo.